Hi, I'm Bob Canote and welcome back to the Camp Chaos Chronicles. On this episode, I'm going to continue to pursue something that has become kind of a passion for me in my life. More electrical wiring. All right, I'm lying. Dang it. All kidding aside, if you're going to be involved in this hobby or business of restoring old engines and automobiles and that sort of thing, you're going to have to do a certain amount of refurbishment or recreation of electrical wiring. Now, in the case of the Jaguar V-12 engine, there are 4 harnesses besides those multicolored ones or color-coded ones that I employed on the engine test stand that you've seen in the last couple episodes. There are 4 harnesses. You got the fuel injection harness, you got the main engine harness, you've got the air conditioning harness, and you got the cruise control. So there's 4 just right there on the engine. And what you got to do, particularly in the ones that are vital to the engine actually running well, you've got to really be meticulous in going through and making sure that these things are in good working order, because they can result in misfires or maybe not even running at all, depending on what the problem is. Now, the project that we're going to be taking on today is actually a couple projects, the same project doing the same thing twice. And what we've got here is a couple of wiring harnesses for the fuel injection system of the Jaguar V-12. And these can be really problematic because these are located down there in the famous Valley of Death, where it is just hot, hot, hot. And the insulation on the wire gets really brittle and cracks, and particularly if you're working with it, they tend to, because they are so brittle, it's very, very easy for them to crack, the wires to crack, and then you get, and a lot of times, up by the injectors in fact, they'll often break in the same spot, so it's possible to get a jumping between wires and the fuel injector doesn't work, that sort of thing. So, and plus the fact, they get pretty ugly looking after a while. And if you're doing overhauls like I do, you want them to look good and function well. So the first thing we're going to do here with these is we're going to unwrap all this greasy electrical tape that's covering about 2/3 of the harness, and that enables us to inspect the insulation on the wires underneath. So let's see what we got here. Well, I've gone as far with this one as I'm going to go. This thing is just a wad of hard-baked, greasy crap that it's going to take more time and effort to restore than it would take to build a new one. It's really just awful. I mean, this sort of thing right here, where you've got those exposed wires, and you don't know, this thing's baked so hard that as you go along, trying to unwrap this thing, you may be creating, in fact, I know I'm creating more of these types of breaks in the wire. And like I said, it's just going to take more time and effort to repair this thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to salvage what I can. We've got this rubber coated fabric that is kind of hard to find. And I'm going to strip that off of here, and this plug on the end, I'll save that so that when it's time to build a new harness, that I've got the parts that are difficult to find right at hand. Let's see what the other one looks like. Well, that went much better. As you can see, we've got one side of this harness all cleaned up and all detaped and ready to begin the next phase. I'm going to do one side at a time here because the tearing apart phase isn't all that much fun. Mr. ADD likes a little mix of activity here. So what we've got here is we've got these plugs, these connectors that plug into the fuel injector, and a real common place for them to break, particularly if a mechanic has pulled these things off and hasn't been sensitive to this issue. This, all of this wire in this harness is really brittle. In fact, when I was unwrapping it, I was using the heat gun to loosen up the tape as well as keeping the wire flexible when I'm bending it, and that worked out pretty well. But up here, I mean, if I were to take this, actually this is pretty good. I'm not going to mess with this. However, I am going to be replacing these connectors because, I mean, the engine that's going on is a pretty high level engine, and this stuff needs to look new. So we're going to replace that. Now, how do you get to this point right here? Well, let's take a look at this one. By the way, wherever you got this cloth, rubber coated cloth sleeve, there's wire under there that you need to inspect. And if you look at this boot up here, this thing's been wrapped with tape, so that boot's been broken for a long time. So what we're going to do here, if I can do this without cutting myself wide open, is we're going to take an X-Acto knife and split the remainder of the boot here. I got a bad feeling about this, but it's a sort of sacrifice I make for you folks. You can then strip this back, and we can already see that there is an issue. Once you get that loose, what you can do is you can take this cloth sleeve and you can pull it back. Yeah, both of them are cracked. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to repair this wire. So if that's the case, we really don't need to. Now, there's a couple things we could do here. We could actually take and tape these wires up and go that route. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this down here someplace, put some new wire on here. This is still pretty flexible down here, but up here it's pretty brittle. So I'm going to renew this. So what we've got here is the wiring harness that has been cleaned up. I use carburetor cleaner for that, and it's a great opportunity to inspect the wires and see where there's cracks, and really there's not a whole lot of a problem in that regard in this, except for there's little cracks here and there, but you can see that right there is going to be an issue because you got two wires right next to each other, and that is going to cause problems. So what I'm going to do is separate them like that, and I'm a believer in this stuff right here, liquid electrical tape. Take a bit of that and swab it down. Get a good wad of that on there. Make sure you get it all the way around. And then let that sit and cure, and then come back and do it again. Get a good heavy buildup on it. And otherwise, what you can do is you can use electrical tape and wrap all this stuff up, but that is such a pain in the neck. So what I'm going to do now is going to go through this whole harness and take care of those spots. Kind of hard to do that on camera here, so I'll see you when I get done with that. As you're disassembling the wiring harness, what you got to do is you got to get these boots removed, and this particular this is off a 1989 V-12. And these are difficult to remove because up here there is a sort of a brown, semi-hardened Permatex-like material that apparently they figured out that this is where most of these things break, and so that's full of that stuff. And if you got to replace the plugs, you got to get these boots off and replace them. So take a pick, slide them up as far as you can go. What you don't want to do, what you're trying to do is you're trying to prevent damage to these fabric sleeves. So you get that way up there like that, and then you just sort of slide down the pick, and there you go. That should get, well, you'd want to do it up a little bit further. Here's that Permatex material right here. It's that brown stuff. And there's no way you're getting any of this stuff off. So what you're gonna have to do is cut this once you got the boot off, and slide that fabric down. Cut this at about the 1.5 to 2 inch point, and replace it with a pigtail, which is our next step. Now I've decided that I'm going to rebuild that really awful harness that I rejected to begin with. It's awful, but not to the point where it can't be rebuilt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 12 of these, and these are called fuel injection connector pigtails. It has the right plastic shell, it has the right terminals on the inside, and this is a Bosch fuel injector, and it fits on like that. And you can see those little springs there. They snap into place behind this little ledge that you see sticking up through that square hole. And to remove it, you just simply wiggle it back and forth, and it comes right off when it's new. When it's old, it breaks. So that's what we're doing here today. We're going to make 12 of those pigtails. Now we're going to need some parts. First of all, we've got the shell for the connector that holds the terminals in those two T-shaped holes right there. We have the steel terminals, which are typically, they come on a little strip of metal like this. You have to cut them loose. And we've got the rubber boots. And what the rubber boots do, they fit over the wires like this, and then they just simply snap into place like that. That's watertight then. And there's a little rubber gasket. If you look down the bottom, you can see there's a gray foam gasket down at the bottom that seals that as well. This end, the plastic coated fabric sleeve that covers the lead that comes from the main harness, that'll fit inside of this end of the connector, and then we can put a piece of shrink tube over this, which will waterproof this connection. So this is what we're after. And we need some tools as well. Cheap pair of wire strippers, soldering iron, some solder, eventually a ruler, and some 18 gauge wire, the color of which is not particularly important. One thing you need to be aware of when you're doing this is that this fuel injector doesn't really care at all about which wire goes where up here in this connector. It just, all it recognizes is a magnetic field to pull the pintle away from the end of the fuel injector to allow fuel to be injected. So polarity, not an issue. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to strip about 5/32 of an inch of insulation off the end of this wire. We then will take one of our steel terminals. You can see that you've got two big tabs. Those clamp down on the insulation, and then you got two smaller tabs. Those clamp down on the wire. So we lay it in here like this. And we squeeze that down like that. One tab. And then we take the other tab, do the same thing, and then we take the two big tabs, and I don't just mash them straight down. I sort of compress them at an angle so they kind of curve as they're being compressed. I think maybe you can see what I'm talking about there. Now, at this point, I mean, if we're honest, this isn't coming out. But what I do, I take just a touch of solder and I nail that down. Repeat 23 times. Once this stuff is cooled down, what we can do then is we're going to take these terminals, and you can see these little tabs that are sticking up here. Those are the things that lock the terminal into the connector shell. You'll slide them into a certain point, it'll push those tabs down, and then when it gets to a certain point, there's a void that'll allow those to snap up, and that'll retain them in. And this is the way it goes. You just slide it in the back of the shell like this, and you push it forward, and eventually it'll snap in place, and you can see the connector out there where it should be. And we'll take the other one. Those aren't coming out. What you don't want to get are these right here. They actually go on the connector just as well. And in fact, they got this little tab here, you push, or this little spring, you push it up and it slides right off, just like that. It's easier than taking these off. But the problem is that you got the spring in the bottom that interferes with the clamp or the hold down for the fuel injector. So these cannot be used without modifying that clamp, which I've done, can be done, but I don't see the point of it unless you're going to be pulling these off on a regular basis. At this point then, I'm going to just take and measure off 2 inches right there and cut her off. One completed EV1 fuel injector pigtail. Before we go on and start reassembling the wiring harness that we're working on, let's take a look at the situation where you got a cracked boot, you got the wires are okay inside, you want to save those, but the shell is cracked. There is a way of actually extracting these pins or terminals from the shell, sliding off the old boot, and then putting a new shell on. That's why I order these parts in this shell knocked down separately. And there's a special tool that you can use for that. Perfect. Now, I'm only partly kidding. There is a way of actually extracting these pins without resorting to a hammer. There are tools that you can use, and this is an example of one right here, where you can take and fit it up into that little square opening up on top, slide it in, and it'll extract the pin on a brand new pigtail like this. The ones that have been in the car for a while, I have yet to be able to use this tool to do this. Now, if you want to use this tool to extract your pins, it works. Clearly, it works. The first blow, you want to concentrate it right here on this edge. What that will do is shatter the shell, and then repeated blows will get rid of this right here. You want to do this with sensitivity, because even having done this a number of times, you'll notice that one of these pins is just a bit skewed. Nothing that can't be brought back. Having a little trouble focusing here, like usual. There you go. but not bad. I mean, these can be restored. So anyway, enough of this stuff. Let's build this harness. As you can see, I've got half of the wiring harness finished over here. I've left this one so that I can show you some of the finer points of how that's done. When you're taking the electrical tape off of the harness in the first place, it's a pretty good idea to take some measurements off of certain landmarks as to where these individual injector leads come off of the main harness. For example, from the split between A and B banks, from here to 1B, that's 6 inches. From 1B to 2B, that's 4 inches. From 2B to 3B, that's 4 inches. From 3B to 4B, that's 5 inches, and so forth down the line. And you can see that I've got all of the shells removed by the previously explained method. But as I said, I've decided I'm going to replace all of these with brand spanky new pigtails and boots. We're going to use 6B, the one at the very rearward most injector on the left side of the engine, as an example. And you can see that we've got the shell already removed. You can see we've got a serious problem here with the insulation on the wire. So we're going to take and slide this back as far as we can. That enables us to inspect the wire to determine that it's not cracked. If it is, we'll repair it. Next thing we're going to do is cut off 1.5 inches from the cable. And we'll do that. Okay, this is where we're going to make the connection between our pigtail and the wire. So what we're going to do is we're going to take about 1/2 inch off of each one of these wires. And we're going to start sliding stuff on here. Actually, we could have done that before we did the stripping, but whatever. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of 3/8 inch shrink tube. This is going to be to seal the end of the boot and the fabric sleeving. And we slide that down as far as we can. Then we're going to take our boot and slide that on down the line. Then we're going to take the shrink tube that we're going to use to cover our solder joint, slide that down on both of them. Make sure that you don't put both of them on the same one. Not that I've ever done that. Okay, then what we're going to do is, now these were 2 inches long to begin with. I shortened the wires 1.5 inches because we're going to have a 1/2 inch overlap here. So take that and we twist that really good. Make sure that we don't have any wild ends hanging out there. I would do it on both of them at the same time so they support each other. And then we'll go ahead and solder them. And there we go. Okay, so we now can take our shrink tube, position that with a joint in the middle of it, as close as we can get. And what I do, you can use a heat gun, but what I use is one of these cheap barbecue lighters. And there you are. Now the next phase will be to slide the boot up. Now, this is kind of an important step right here. It's going to meet some resistance as it tries to pull over that shrink tube. What I would recommend at this point is to take the end of this boot and try to turn it over on itself. Don't know how successful I'm going to be here with the camera in the way. But keep rolling it up like this. Then push it up, slide it into place. And there you are. Okay, then what you do is you bring your sleeving up. Now it may hang up on the shrink tube itself as well, so just take a forceps, grab onto it, and pull it up. Okay, so we've got this up like this. Now what we want to do is take the boot and roll it over, and there you are. You can actually continue to slide it on like that. So that fabric is up to right about there. Take your shrink tube, center it, and there you go. It's sealed in there, sealed here, and sealed down there. And that's as good as it needs to be. Repeat 11 more times. Well, we got it done. And when I say it, I mean we have a completely refurbished Jaguar V-12 wiring harness for the fuel injection system. And I've been over every inch of this thing. There is no cracks on it. I've checked the continuity on everything, and this wiring harness is as good as a new one. And think about what we've done here. If you go to some websites where they sell these things new, you're looking at between $650 and $700 for the ones that I've seen. They may be cheaper elsewhere. Well, let's figure out what we've got in this. We're looking at about $4.50 per fuel injector for parts, and about 3/4 of a roll of electrical tape. So we're definitely looking at less than $100 to do this. Now, if you were to consider what it would cost to have somebody do this, you know, it took me 5 hours at a normal shop rate of $100, $125 or so per hour. Well, you do the math on that. So if you've got more time than money, this is the way to go. Fairly simple thing to do. You can do it yourself. So if you like these videos, like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, and leave some comments down below so that we can know what we can do to do better. And we'll see you the next time on the Camp Chaos Chronicles.